when I was writing Miss E. But another piece that I think was really important when I was writing was personal experience. And I think you probably all do this when you're writing. We write about what we know. Right? And I think that sort of writing comes very naturally. If you're familiar with something, if you were there, you know what it was like, or you know how you felt when you rode that roller coaster, or went to the beach, or went camping, or whatever. Those things are easy to kind of pull on and get information out of and write. Even if we're making up a story, we can kind of pull on things that we've experienced to build that story. Really simple example, the main character is a high school student. So I went to high school, so I know what high school is like. I taught middle school. I know what it's like when students change classes. Those are personal experiences that I had that helped me create that part of the story. I didn't have to research what it was like to go to high school, because I had that personal experience. One personal experience that came in really useful. I've got this horrible picture. I apologize. It looks really good on my phone screen, but not so much on this screen. It's a picture of an airplane, and this shadowy blob is me at about 5 years old, and my father is back there somewhere in another shadowy blob. So when I was growing up, my father had an airplane. He had his pilot's license. It wasn't his job, it was just something he did for fun. But we would occasionally, on the weekends, go flying with him. And I had 5 siblings, so we didn't all get to go. There was only 4 seats in the plane, and my father was sitting in one of them. But we would kind of take turns going with Dad to the airport and going flying, which I realize now was a pretty unique experience. We don't all get to do that. I don't have a plane. I can't take my kids flying. I wish I could. But if I was really lucky, I got to sit in the front seat. And I assume this is true in most planes. There are 2 sets of controls. So, unlike a car that you can just pull over and switch drivers, you can't really do that in a plane when you're up in the air. So each seat in the front has its own controls. There's pedals on the floor to work the rudder, and there's a yoke, like a steering wheel, that turns it left to right and up and down. Some planes have a control stick that does the same thing. But every once in a while, if I was sitting in the front seat, my father would let me put my feet on the rudder pedals and put my hands on the control yoke, and then he would let go, and I was flying the plane. Which I think it was pretty good at flying straight and level, so it wasn't too challenging. But then he would coach me a little bit and say, "All right, well, push in your left foot and turn to the left a little bit," and we would feel the plane go over. Okay, bring it back, straighten it out. You bring it back. Sometimes you'd overcompensate and you would turn back the other way. No, bring it back. Okay, push it in. Whoa. But that was pretty cool to get to do that as a kid. So when I got to a part in Miss E where Bets goes flying in an airplane, first time in an airplane, and actually gets to fly the plane, I didn't have to research that. I could have, I guess. I could have read about what it was like to fly in a plane, or how a plane works and that sort of thing, and learn through research. But I didn't have to, because I had that personal experience. And I think we do that a lot in our writing. We take advantage of what we already know and put that into our writing. So I'm gonna read about Bets's flight. Just to give you a little, set the scene up a little bit. So Miss E is kind of this mysterious person in Bets's town. She lives on the outskirts of town and doesn't really talk to anyone. Only comes to town every once in a while, and no one really knows her. They don't even really know her name. But she ends up befriending Bets, and Bets gets to know her. And at this point, Miss E has convinced Bets that she should take a ride in this airplane. So they drive to this old airport. It's got like a grass runway, and there's this old airplane that kind of looks like it's ready to fall apart. But Miss E convinces Bets that she does this all the time and it's safe. Bets is nervous, but she trusts Miss E and gets in the plane. "Ready, Bets?" Miss E's voice shouted behind me, almost lost in the roar of the engine. I didn't think I could manage a voice loud enough to be heard, and instead meekly raised my hand in a thumbs-up gesture. The engine couldn't possibly get louder, and then it did. I noticed a knob on the panel in front of me move as if it were being pulled out by an invisible hand, and I realized it was mirroring Miss E's as she pulled out her throttle and turned the low, rumbling roar into a high-pitched whine. At first, the Duster stood still, reminding me of the Electra trapped back in the barn. And then we slowly began to roll forward again, faster and faster, until the blur of fields outside the cockpit matched the whine of the engine. The plane tilted forward as the small tail wheel lifted off the ground, and the view suddenly opened up in front of me. The small building and other planes were ahead of us, but we approached them so quickly, almost as soon as I noticed them, we were passing by them and leaving them behind. The big front wheels were bumping along the grass runway, and then they weren't. Just like that, we were in the air. And just as quickly, the engine quieted and the vibration stopped, as if the Duster had been working with all its might to move along the ground at such a speed. And now that it was in the air and back in its element, it could relax. My eyes couldn't look in enough directions fast enough. In a breath, the field ahead of us disappeared and was replaced by a forest, and then another field behind that, and a small stream to the side, and then a river that the stream must flow into, and then, I think, through the haze of miles of empty air, mountains showed their silhouettes against the sky. But each second I looked, there was more to see. I twisted my neck to both sides and struggled to see something we'd just flown over as it slipped behind, only to snap my gaze back to the front so I didn't miss what was coming. I thought Missy was shouting behind me, and I struggled to hear, and then realized she was laughing and cheering. I twisted in my seat and could see her face behind the small windshield that was between us. She was smiling and had one hand raised in the air, as if she were catching the air as it flowed past. And see, I'd seen kids at school that were old enough to drive do the same in convertibles. They thought they were having the time of their lives. They had no idea what they were missing. I couldn't resist raising my own arms above my head and letting out a cheer of my own. I wiggled in my seat as I flapped my imaginary wings in the air and was surprised when my foot pushed into something on the floor. The plane reacted immediately. We turned to the left, but it was like the front half of the plane was still trying to pull us straight ahead, while the tail was steering us someplace else. In one motion, my foot jumped off the pedal like it was on fire, and I turned in my seat to look at Miss E and make sure everything was okay. When I did, my knee caught the control stick, pushing it forward and to the side. Again, the plane's reaction was immediate. The nose of the plane dropped down and the whine of the engine increased, like we were picking up speed. At the same time, we rolled to the left, and I was suddenly looking out the side of the plane at the ground below us. I scrambled for something on the opposite side to hold on to, forgetting the seatbelt that was buckled firmly across my waist. Then, as quickly as we had turned and tilted, we were straight and level again. Woo-hoo! That was exciting, huh? You having fun, Bats? Missy called from behind with a laugh in her voice. Too nervous to take my hands off the edge of the cockpit, I only nodded. The view outside had changed. We'd come closer to the ground in the short second that the plane was tipping, and I wondered how many more seconds we would have had in the air if Missy hadn't straightened things out. All's well, Bats. We needed to start making some turns anyway. Nothing wrong with flying in a straight line when you have someplace to go. But if that's all we're going to do, we might as well be driving on a road. Go ahead, Bats, take the stick. I shook my head repeatedly, But Missy's shouts of encouragement from behind finally convinced me. Gradually, I slid my right hand off the edge of the cockpit and curled my fingers around the control stick. I immediately felt the plane in my hand. There was resistance in the stick, and even though my knee had pushed it easily, I could feel that pushing it now would, in a way, be like pushing the whole plane.